Welcome to today's webinar, Avoid Discounting Using Value-Based Pricing. Today's presenters are Ed Arnold, VP of Products, and Jay Manson, VP of Sales. Turn it over to you, Ed.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to talk to you about this important topic. And this is a 30-minute webinar, and we'll be covering a number of related topics: the reality of B2B discounts, the root cause of discounting, the case for collaboration, a little bit of about us at Leverage Point. We'll be moving along pretty quickly with my colleague here, Jay. We'll leave about 5 minutes at the end of this webinar for any questions. To ask a question, you're going to need to use the chat feature, and that's accessible from the right-hand side of the panel. On the bottom, there's a place that says chat. Just send to the presenters, and Aaron will be watching that, and we'll respond to them at the end of the session. Okay, well, let's get started. So, Jay, I was wondering, I mean, it was our mutual idea to start this webinar. What triggered this particular topic for you?
Well, Ed, so I recently came back from Professional Pricing Society. And at Professional Pricing Society, you'd sit through session after session where people were talking about how evil discounting was, how terrible discounting was, and how stupid salespeople are for giving away discounts. And as a sales guy, you can imagine that created a little burr under my saddle, because truthfully, we work with great companies that are world-class companies that have great management teams, great sales and marketing teams, great pricing teams, and those organizations all discount. So what's wrong with discounting? And part of our view is there's nothing wrong with discounting as long as you understand what you're discounting.
Right.
So, you know, this slide is supposed to represent what we see a lot. You know, a good company, well-run, ABC company, has a price that they've set with a long-established customer. There is a general nebulous understanding about what the value is associated with that. And some nasty competitor comes into the marketplace and fires the shot and says, hey, throw in a price there. Let's see whether we can dislodge this supplier. And we see this all the time, right? Yeah. And actually, I've done it myself. I've had VPs of sales say, Jay, go throw in a low price and see whether we can get the business.
Especially end of the year, right?
Yeah, this is the fourth quarter. This is when everyone's doing it. So how does ABC company respond? Well, maybe they take a little something off the table. Maybe it's something like it was 60-day terms, we'll now make it 30-day terms. So they take something off the table. It's not really deep understanding about what the value is of what you've taken off the table from the customer, but then there's a price that's lowered. Ultimately, what we're looking at here, though, is that we've held on to the customer. That's a good thing. We have, if we've done our analysis internally, we may have actually improved the profitability of this customer. And what's the competition gain from this? Not very much. But one of the reasons why they're pulling that discount lever is there's a real clear understanding about what the price is, and it's a lot more nebulous around what the value is.
Okay. Well, let's find out what our audience experience is with discounting right now. And so we're going to ask the audience for their experiences with discounting. So let's pull up a polling question right now. And the question is, what percentage of your company's deals are discounted? And your choices are none, less than 25%, 25 to 50%, 50 to 75%, and more than 75%. So the poll is open. Select one of those. We want to get a sense of how much discounting your companies are doing right now. So Jay, if you were to make a prediction, I love doing this. Where do you think most companies fall?
I would say most companies fall between C and D.
Okay.
Last time we did this webinar, Ed got me to commit to one answer, so I'm hedging my bets this time, hoping I get 50% right.
All right. And let me just check with our colleague, Aaron. Are the responses still coming in? Are we ready to show the results? Almost. We'll give it another moment.
What is so interesting, though, is there isn't a company that we're talking to now that we don't see discounting happening.
Yeah.
And the level of discounting is the next question that we're going to ask. But what's really interesting is that it is prevalent.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's take a look at the results. And you're posting the results, so if I know that the audience is seeing them, but we don't see them right now.
Yep. So we have 6% none, 6% less than 25%, 25% in the 25 to 50% range, 19% in the 50 to 75% range, and 44%.
Wow.
The largest amount is more than 75%.
Well, Jay.
So I was wrong again.
So a lot of discounting.
Exactly.
That doesn't surprise me too much, given what you said about PPS.
Yeah. What we should also say is, just for the group, we have almost 50 participants on the line. So, and they're across a lot of different industries.
Right.
So this isn't like we're just looking at one specific industry that shows this level of
Well, I
discount.
mean, it's clear that a lot of people discount. Now, let's get a sense of how much discounting is going on. So let's move on to the next polling question. So a little bit different. We want to get a sense of how much is your company's typical discount nowadays. So again, 5 choices. We never discount, under 10%, 10 to 25%, 25 to 40%, over 40%. So please choose one. The question is open, Aaron? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. And this one is going to be really interesting.
And what
Care to make a prediction here, or?
Well, what we see here is it really depends on industry.
Yeah, I
So
think it does.
an under 10% discount in a distribution business is pretty typical. Over 40% in a software industry is not that unusual.
That's right.
So a lot of that's going to vary based on industry.
So yeah, that depends on who the mix of the audience. All right.
One more moment.
Just another moment, and we'll be able to take a look at the results. Okay, now we are able to see the polling on the screen.
So 43% talk about a 10 to 25% discount.
Right. All right, so we're sharing the results, and you'll see that the biggest segment there is in the 10 to 25% range. Okay. But a number above that. Very, very interesting. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. And Jay, I mean, you know, in the beginning you talked about discounts in the sense of them being evil, or at least some people perceiving them to be evil, but that's not really the case, is it?
No, and I think what this polling information provides is that everyone's discounting. Small percentage is not discounting. The real question, the real issue that we're dealing with is, in B2B markets, purchases are essentially economic transactions. A customer is trying to figure out, how do I improve my business? How do I make it better? And under most situations in B2B markets, there's going to be a rational decision process that's being laid out. The issue that we run into is that typically procurement and sales are operating with incomplete information and highly imperfect information. A lot of it is anecdotal. So there's a limited understanding of the full economic impact of a solution. We do see companies that build ROI models, but the true impact of the solution is very frequently hard to define. Very rarely do we see that there's actual an assessment from an economic standpoint between two alternatives. And if there is a value proposition that's being created, it tends to be fairly artificial, and it lacks real true financial terms that are relevant to the customer and the customer's metrics. So because of this lack of information, B2B industries have created a whole set of business practices, pricing practices, offer structures that really disconnect price and value. And when price and value are disconnected, that's where you see discounting.
So why is this occurring? I mean, what are sort of the root causes behind this?
Well, if you think about it, they're really in 3 specific areas. The first one is really our own fault, right? In pricing, our own fault. Frequently, we don't have a good understanding of different segments. So we're creating a one-size-fits-all price. And when we do that, we even put into those segments discounting ranges. So of course there's going to be discounting ranges. The issue is when we're thinking about pricing segments is we really want to understand what's the value that we deliver to those different segments and wrap those two pieces together. The second piece is competition. I don't know how often we hear our customers talk about an irrational competitor in the marketplace. We're working with a company here in Boston, $3 billion business. They have a highly competitive marketplace. The head of pricing strategy was talking to me last week about how the VP of sales for their territory in upstate New York came to them talking about this irrational competitor that is throwing price out the window. Fourth quarter, we've got to do something about it.
All right.
Well, our customer spent some time looking at it and actually investigated the prices that they had set in the marketplace. And there were a couple of outliers that they had set in the marketplace that had clearly indicated to this competitor that they were trying to go down in the market. So we don't really understand what the competition is. We don't understand our effective price on the competition. And that's really important. And then the final piece is procurement systems. And if any of you were on the last webinar we had, there was one of my pet peeves is we're going up to negotiate against procurement.
Right.
Procurement spends $2 billion a year on software solutions.
Right.
Pricing systems is about $100 million. Who's better armed for that fight? And because we don't have a clear understanding about what the value is, and it's been disconnected and procurement wants to disconnect it, we get in this adversarial relationship where the only number that's out there to negotiate on is the price number, and that's where you see the discounting.
So 3 sort of key root causes around discounting. That's great. Thanks, Jay. Next slide. So you had some thoughts about how to break out of those root causes. So we see this table here of collaboration, I guess.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
So the solution, what's the solution around this? First, we need to be able to provide the sales organization with value information. And we need to provide it in a format so they can provide that same value information to customers.
Mm-hmm.
And once that's been provided to customers, we need to aggregate the customer's perspective so we can continue to improve how we view value. And we also need to leverage sales interactions into the pricing process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, saying these things, I'm sure on the phone there is a collective view of what my 12-year-old daughter says, you know, "Doy, Dad," of course. The real issue is, why doesn't this happen? And the real issue is, when we talk to most customers, they say, well, you know what? You don't know what it's like to work with my sales team. You don't know what it's like to work with my marketing team. You don't know what it's like to work with my customers. And that's where the rubber really hits the road.
Well, let's take a deeper dive in that right now. So what's going on here, Jay?
Well, I mean, I think this is the typical adversarial relationship that we see. And there was a woman who spoke at PPS who talked about this in spades, about her relationship at Microsoft with her sales team and how stupid her sales team was. And she was talking about how she had done all this pricing analysis and had identified what were the optimal price points in each market segment that their customer, that they should be charging their customer. And I was looking at it and going, hey, that's great that you've done the math, but how am I ever going to justify a price like that to the customer?
Yeah, yeah.
And Ed, what's your response to that?
My response is typically, stop whining, Jay. Go out there and sell. Yeah.
And so that's kind of the environment.
Yeah.
Everyone's pointing fingers at each other.
So we have to look
By the way, Ed is the good-looking guy on the right in this picture. I'm the dorky guy on the left, and Ed chose the slide, just so you know what's going on here.
I did. Okay. So the solution is collaboration.
And I actually think collaboration is the real word that we need to think about here. Because there's 2 aspects to collaboration. Mm-hmm. There's the one aspect around collaboration, which is what we talk about a lot, and that's about working together on a given solution. Mm-hmm. And I think inside our organizations, pricing, marketing, product development, sales, We need to work together to understand what the value looks like. And then on the other side, we also have to work with the enemy, or who we have been calling the enemy, and that's procurement organizations. Reed Holden at PPS spoke eloquently about how important it is to understand what's going on with procurement today.
Okay.
And by understanding what procurement's trying to accomplish, by working together internally, we can actually work with procurement to help them understand how to make better business decisions. And that's where we should be trying to go to.
Okay, so let's look at it from the point of views of a few of the participants in this process. So we start out with a customer.
Yeah.
This could be the procurement. This is probably a procurement person many of us have faced at one time in our lives, or our history teacher or English teacher. But what do they want? What do customers want?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I was at this father-son breakfast at my son's school today, and I was sitting next to a guy who's a procurement officer at EMC. EMC is a big technology firm. They have been acquiring companies right and left. They recently acquired a fairly small software company. And I was asking him about how the acquisition went, and he described how they went through a process to rationalize their supplier agreements. And they came across a whole section of suppliers where this small software company, you know, really barely a rounding error on EMC's revenue from comparison, was getting much better prices across the board. And you could imagine how he felt. He's like, I've been negotiating with these suppliers for a long time. This really showed me up. And the conversation really came about how he doesn't trust pricing. I think it's really important to think about what's actually happening from the customer's perspective. They don't want to pay more than their competitors.
Right.
This guy really felt like he was showed up because one of their competitors, who they did happen to acquire, was getting a much better price than he was. He also described how challenging it is to understand what's the real value that a supplier delivers. And as EMC's grown, they have all sets of needs around delivery times, internationalization, all of those things that they make as requirements. They know they're important, but very few of the vendors step forward and actually show them what's the value of it.
So it's not just value from the procurement point of view, but all the other departments, all the other functions in the organization that have that your offering touches.
Exactly.
And to understand that economically.
And for him, part of the challenge is their business is getting more and more complex.
Right.
When he first joined EMC, they were a pretty straightforward, simple company to understand. They are now a global, international company with lots of products and services that they're delivering. And it's very hard to understand what's going on in the business, and he needs to be educated by suppliers around what's going on in the business.
Okay, great. So who's next?
Well, on my hit parade, it's the sales team. What do salespeople want? Salespeople, and I love this picture, Ed. Thanks for choosing it.
Nice ties, actually.
Nice tie, yeah. Ed told me we had to wear ties today, and then I show up with a tie, and he doesn't. So what do salespeople want? Tell me the 3 or 4 things that make us different from the competition, and help me quantify those so that I can have a good conversation, a business conversation with my customer. That's what salespeople ask for again and again. And when Ed and I are piloting the leverage point solution, all the time we see marketing folks, pricing folks saying, this may be a little complex. We'll wait to give it to salespeople.
Right.
And as soon as the salespeople see it, they say, this is what we want. It tells us the 3 or 4 things that make us better. I think what's really important here to understand is that it's not just about simplifying or dumbing down the message. What it really is about is getting very specific, very focused on those key elements that are important to the customer. And one of the large mistakes that we make is we try and, quote, dumb it down for the field, dumb it down for the channel. But what we want to do is help the channel select the specific areas that are going to have the greatest impact for their customer and give them the chance to do that. And ultimately, as they do that, listen to what this field is telling you. When we talked about collaboration, They're actually having conversations with customers. Let's collect that information, because that information is when a customer is making a buying decision. That's when it's most valuable.
Okay. Okay, and then we have one other point of view. That is the pricing or the marketing point of view. And as you can see here, marketers such as like myself have a variety of analytic tools, forecasting tools, as you see here, that they use to see what's going on in the marketplace. But the key priorities from a marketing perspective is information about customers, information about competitors. Nowadays marketers have to collect that information. We hear that a lot when we're working with clients. Where do we get this information? Many times they resort to market research, whether it's secondary research or primary research, which is very, very expensive, and to your point, may not be answering the real true attitudes of the customer, because as you say, the customer, you really know the customer's point of view when they're in a purchasing decision. If it's in a market research interview decision, they might not be telling you what they really think. It's not that they're lying, it's just that it's not a real sort of situation for them. So it's really important to get great information. The best source of information is what's happening out in the field with your salespeople. The ability to aggregate that information, because right now, discounts kind of happen in a one-off sort of situation. I need to close this particular deal, and everyone's just looking at that one data point. But if you're to look at holistically at what's happening across all customers, a marketer can then look at that analytically and say, this is what's going on. This is how customers are responding to certain offerings. This can give us insights about what segments we should be going on. So the discount problem may not be a discount problem. It is really a segmentation problem. And then ultimately, it's about the strategic decisions, which are, how do I spend my scarce marketing resources? Where should we put our money into product development, marketing communications, etc.? So it's all of those things. But again, it all rides on having the best information you can.
Yeah. And one of the advantages that Ed and I have is being the VP of sales and marketing, we're able to work hand in hand. And it's a great advantage that we have. But as the organization gets more dispersed, it's much harder to develop these partnerships where there can be that true sharing of information.
Right, and I think that leads into our solution, which is the Leverage Point platform. And the reason we call it a platform is that it unites a lot of these groups who have their own jobs to do, but they all have an impact on value. So Jay, maybe if you can just sort of describe how the solution works.
Yeah, so again, what we see is the solution to the problem around discounting. And our view is the problem around discounting is not discounting. It's that discounting is that price is disconnected from value. So our view around fixing that is, first, if you look inside the box around pricing, product development, and marketing, is first to define and collaborate with each other to define what is the value that you deliver for a given customer segment with a unique offer that you're delivering. Let's first understand what that looks like. Then let's provide that content to sales so sales can collaborate with the enemy, with the customer. Let's collaborate with the customer. Let's build out the unique value proposition for that customer. Once we've captured that customer's bringing that forward in their buying process, we're pulling it back into our value modeling process. What is this doing? First of all, it's addressing the important area. The important area, and if you look at any price waterfall today, the important area is, how do we capture the maximum list price, and how do we reduce discounting? Those two elements alone will drive tremendous pocket margin. How do you find that information out? You have to work outside of your four walls. This information allows you to start to work outside of your four walls and get critical information back inside.
And what I like about this is that it's not a one-time process. It's a loop. It's an iterative process, because the market's changing every day, every hour, and having the latest data of what's happening with competitors and with your customers, and just from people learning, not having to reinvent the wheel all the time, be able to have access to what they've learned in the field is, I think, tremendous value for us.
And just as a kind of a real life example, we're working with a software company right now in the medical space. They provide information to hospitals and doctors. Some of that information is critical to the operations of a hospital, and what they were able to do, working inside that box, product development, marketing, work together to identify a very specific value proposition that this information provided to hospitals to improve their efficiency. They built that model out in great detail. It's an Excel model right now, and part of our conversation is how do they get it on an iterative platform today. But they built that out, they passed that to sales. Now that sales is having conversations with customers, it is completely believable for customers. They understand these metrics. It's how they measure themselves. What they have seen is going from the 40 to 50% discounting range to a 10 to 15% discounting range. Now in the software marketplace, that is pure margin. That was a huge win for this organization. And it's where they're taking this type of approach to really dramatically change their profitability, improve their pocket margin, but also critically as well, it has changed their ability to penetrate the market. It's not just about using discounting to capture market share and holding on price to capture profit. A good value-based approach will allow you to both capture market share and maximize your margin as you're doing that.
Okay, very good. All right, so I'm looking, we're just about out of time. We have about 5 minutes for questions, and Aaron's been watching the chat board. Aaron, any questions?
One good question I just came up is, how do you collaborate with a customer which wants to keep you at arm's length and compete via an RFP process?
That's a great question, and we see that a lot. We're working with a major supplier in the automotive industry right now. And in the automotive industry, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, they send out an RFP with the price of the specific product in there. So how do you approach it? Again, what we're thinking about from a value-based pricing perspective is two things. One is, how do we maximize our margin on a given transaction? The other piece is, how do we penetrate the market? If you're deciding to go after this RFP and you decide that we want to respond to it, let's build out the business case as to why, if our part is $2.50 and the competitor's part is $2.50, let's be sure we win at that $2.50. And the value message that you put together should help them understand what that looks like. And based on having specific questions about their business, it drives the collaboration because they see that you're invested in their business success and they want help to understand that.
Okay, can you give a real-life example of how value-based pricing has helped a company avoid discounting?
Well, I think at the kind of in the conclusion here, I talked a little bit about the software company that we're having discussions with right now that have used this approach to really drive down discounting. But I think the flip side of this as well is organizations that have been able to use this value-based approach to really expand market share. And one of the challenges that we see frequently is that particularly in this down economy, it seems like the pie is shrinking, and any gain of market share means we're shrinking the pie even more. So what we have seen is that organizations have been effective at using this approach to better identify a specific segment where they should have tremendous control. Our CEO and I met with a company yesterday that had decided to focus specifically on a vertical market. And as they focused on that vertical market, the value proposition became so powerful as they built out the differential value against other competitors who also sell into these verticals, because they had a deep understanding of the business. And based on that deep understanding of the business, it would be very hard for any competitor to go into these vertical markets.
Okay. Are there any other questions, Aaron?
Yeah, here's a question. What are the most common functions that you see being early adopters or champions of your solution?
Great question. So there's the
well, a couple places really. Yeah. I mean, I think product development is one area, because they have as part of the product development process a value estimation phase is often the case. And what I've seen is, especially in large companies, it's an exercise. People either reuse the same spreadsheet they used last year to justify another project, or I've actually seen value analysis done on spreadsheets, which not spreadsheets, on PowerPoint slides, where you can't even change the numbers. So that gives you a sense of the quality of a lot of these financial decisions or economic decisions are made. Immediately get a lot of traction there as well. So that's one area. On the Marcom side, right, what we've seen on that software example, there's a lot of redundancy of re-inputting information from between systems. But ultimately, sales is where we see the most traction here, right, Jay?
Yeah, yeah. And you know it's interesting. So Ed talked about product development. What we see frequently with product development is there's a level of frustration. We have just developed a great new product. We're trying to bring it into the marketplace. By the time that great product has been communicated to the sales team, the value seems to have been stripped out inside our four walls. So one of the things that the new product development guys want is to be able to provide the sales gals with the right information.
Right.
And that information about value and the impact. And oh, by the way, that's what salespeople want to sell. And that's why it's really interesting that we see product development and sales as the two places that most often get excited about this application.
Yep. So one more real practical question. How do you know if you're truly discounting or if your list price is simply too elevated?
Well, how do you know? You know if you've really understood what is the value that you're delivering to the customer. That's the key piece. What is the value that you're delivering to the customer, and is that connected to your price point? The discounting that occurs when your list price is too high could very well be because you've disconnected value and price. Discounting that occurs because you're trying to close a deal, similarly. So it's really about the connection of value to price.
Well, and the other thing to think too is that products mature, right? So what was a great list price a couple years ago is no longer a great list price. Value propositions change over time, and it's hard enough to get a sense of what the value of your product really is, but just to realize that can change, year to year, maybe month to month. It's really important to have a good handle about that.
Yeah, and we see this a lot in publishing space, where every year there is a price increase, but the actual price that's captured is based on last year's price. And you just see this delta that's being created between what the list price is and what's actually being captured, and there's no reality there. So you're just kind of in a spiral, free fall spiral.
All right, so I think that concludes our webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We'll be sending you an email with a couple of questions to ask your feedback. If you want some more information, you could contact us there, or you can contact us here through the Leverage Point website. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks very much.